electoral votes, more than 270, more than enough to become the 44th president of the United States. He will be the first African-American president of the United States.
I've been broke all my life, but I kept hope all them nights. You see business in my city? Yeah, they closed all them twice. I was just riding down Salem, all them damn potholes, I can't drive. I know y'all can fix it faster, but I know y'all won't try. Don't nobody care about us, and that's why I don't vote. Voted for Obama back in 2012, I remember that's when I had hope. He was saying, yes, we can, and everybody got less food stamps. And when I turned 21, I was still broke, I'd never vote again. I don't think I ever had a president make my life better. Did it all on my own, ain't no politician ever do a nice gesture. I don't even know the mayor's name, I ain't never seen her one time ever. Tell me how she gonna help the city. What I'm supposed to do, write letters? What I'm supposed to do, blame Trump? He ain't never really gave a ain't nobody raised minimum wage. None of these jobs pay enough. I think they just wanna keep us broke, cause they ain't putting none in place for us. This how all my people feel, but we gotta learn. We complained enough, let me change it up. Everything I just said, everybody I know think the same way. See, they don't wanna see us vote, and we never do, so we see the same thing. But all our votes really do count, and they'll never really let it show. So now I'm finna break it down, cause if I don't, you would probably never know. First thing first, you know back in middle school when they taught us, it was 3 branches of the government. We forgot it when we got older. It's the judicial, the legislative, and executive. But all we know is the executive. That's the mayor or the governor and the president. Now none of them 3 people make no laws, they just be checking them. The laws come to their desk and all they do is say no or yes to it. So when the news station tried to tell us that Barack Obama couldn't put us on, we was all salty at Obama when it was the Congress members all along. We gotta focus on the legislative branch, yeah, they the ones that make the laws. Yeah, they the ones write how much food stamp money you get on the card. But when people that wanted to help us wanted the job, I know they probably lost. Cause we ain't even know their name, we ain't know their face, we ain't know it all. So the Congress or the State House, that's legislative, they make laws. So what we want from the president is what they do, okay y'all? See, they election every 2 years, but we don't ever even go to those. The Congress, they can raise minimum wage, but we ain't even really know it though. So you know how back in 08, when we all voted for Obama, we was all supposed to go back in 2010 and vote for the Congress. Cause they the ones make child support laws, they the ones choose if your kids at school get to eat steak or corn dogs. The State House make the court costs. So if the country failed, then you can't say it's them, it's your fault. Cause y'all ain't know to vote for Congress members that was for y'all. And they don't gotta leave after 4 years, and we just let them sit. See, they don't wanna tell you this, they want you to focus on the president. Now the third branch is the judicial, that's judges. They the reason why John Crawford and Trayvon ain't had justice. So when Meek Mill got locked up just for popping willies, we blame the judge and not the city when they let her get voted in, cause they ain't know who to vote against. Imagine life on the other side. Roads better, schools better, everybody get their license back, grocery store food better, custody of your kids back, homeless people get new shelters. If we gon' fix the U.S., we gotta start with them 2 letters, me and you. Somebody told us that the government wanna keep us broke, but the only reason why those people in the government is cause we ain't vote. And I ain't talking about the president, I'm talking about the ones we ain't know. See, they was gonna try to keep it low, but it's gonna hurt them when they see the pros.
Every time you stay home, someone is making a decision about you, making decisions about the air you breathe, the water you drink, the food your kids eat, and how much money you bring home every 2 weeks. So every time you sit out an election, every time you don't show up because you think it doesn't matter, someone else is happy that you didn't show up, so they can make that decision for you. Vote.
Welcome back to YBC Revolt Talk. I am Tanya Dunbar, and tonight we are discussing your vote counts, the importance of your vote. As you all know at YBC, we are focused on the disparities facing the Black community. So while tonight we will be discussing the overall importance of for everyone to vote and how you do that, we will focus on the importance of the Black vote and what that means to our communities. I invite you all to please be sure to like, follow, and share all of our social media outlets on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at YBC Revolt, as well as share this active live so that more folks can continue to tune in as we focus on getting smarter together. So tonight we started off the talk a little different with the reflection of reasons behind why your vote not only counts, but more importantly matters, and the impact your vote can have on the change we need. The images you saw were overlaid with the song by Dayton, Ohio rapper Yellow Pain, which was released at the end of 2019, but was the center of the beginning of the primary elections back in February. He takes us through a transition of feelings that many people feel about voting. My vote doesn't matter. What has the government done for me? They don't care about us. How can the politicians help me? But he goes on to break down the government structure and how your vote counts and matters. We started tonight's talk with this approach because we hope to impart a little additional knowledge in the areas discussed in Yellow Pain's song upon each of you. Tonight, I'm joined by YBC members Eunice Pierre-Louis, Harold Booker, Michonne Cicero, and C. Andrews Jackson. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Hey guys. So we're going to jump right into this thing, but viewers, we do ask that as usual, we invite you to please actively participate throughout, as we will be monitoring the comments for any questions you may have along the way. Since we're talking about voting, we know that this has been a hot topic over the last several months, especially since the primaries began, but also in the last couple of days. So we want to really make sure that we have an open and honest conversation, and we're going to be real. So we're going to jump right in, and there have been a lot of myths and misunderstandings floating around, I think, for a long time about how voting in America works. So we're going to start there, and we want to further define for you the government structure. And let me get my screens together here because we got a little share screen we're going to do.
Yep. And in particular, we'll be talking about just voting in America, right? United States.
Right. So American government structure is defined as a democracy by the people, for the people, basically with the intent to prevent one person from having the ability to make all the decisions. It was structured with checks and balances through the creation of 3 primary levels. At each level, there is a voting process that takes place. However, the elections take place at different frequencies, and we'll break that down here in a few minutes. The most famous election would be the presidential election, which takes place every 4 years, which is upon us this year in 2020. We have the election coming up in November. But do note that the other elections are just as important, and we'll also touch on that and the reasons behind that. Our 3 branches of government are the legislative, executive, and the judicial branches. The legislative makes the laws. It's made up of Congress, Senate, and the House of Representatives. The Congress and the House of Representatives are elected every 2 years, and our Senate goes through elections every 6 years. The executive branch carries out the laws, and they're elected every 4 years. It's made up of the president, vice president, and the cabinet of the president. It's also referred to as the presidential election that occurs every 4 years. And then we have the judicial branch, which evaluates the laws, which is made up of Supreme Court and other federal court judges. These officials are selected by the president and confirmed by the Senate. The Supreme Court, they also hold, these individuals hold lifetime appointments. Okay. So there are 2 methods of voting. You have electronically in person at a designated voting location, or you can do via mail-in ballot, or better known as absentee ballot. In a presidential election, the people of the state cast their vote. These votes are tallied, and the electors of the state then place a formal vote on behalf of the people for the president and vice president based on those results from the people's vote. Now, each state has a certain number of electors based on factors such as the state population. This is usually determined by the results of the census. So that's why when y'all hear people saying, make sure you submit your census, because you want to make sure that you're counted and accounted for, not only from an electoral college voting perspective, but also more importantly, from a funding perspective for your individual state. As electoral votes come in from each state, those votes are tallied up to determine the winner of the presidential race. Now, of course, there are exceptions to the rule when discussing electors and their formal vote, but this is generally what takes place every 4 years, right? We vote. They vote based on our popular vote as the people of the state. And we're going to break down a little bit more in detail a little later, all of these terms from electoral college, popular vote, and as well as designated voting locations, etc. Now, going back for just a minute to the two methods of voting, it's important to note that because we are in the midst of a health crisis, states are attempting to make it easier for citizens to vote absentee by mail this year due to the coronavirus. Now, every state's election rules are very different. And so each state has its own rules for mail-in absentee voting. So we do advise that you check with your local election commission office to confirm on the specific rules by your state. Many states are still in the process of deciding how they will handle the voting during the pandemic, but you can submit now to request your absentee ballots. If you do not want to go vote in person, you can check right now, usa.gov/absentee-voting to submit a request by state. Again, that's usa.gov/absentee-voting to submit a request by state. Now, just so everybody understands about absentee voting, we know that there are a lot of rumors circulating about what's happening at the U.S. Postal Service, as there has been a new general postmaster put in place. So you are advised to try to drop off your absentee ballot at your election commission's office versus mailing it back in if possible. But again, if you're going to mail it, please do so early. There are rules by state on when they actually send out the absentees, how early you can vote and send it back in. So again, just check with your local election commission and get that information. But for those of you that want to vote in person, it's important to understand the various voting districts. Eunice, can you speak to how voting districts are designated?
Yeah, and so you touched on it. So that's the importance of having the census, the U.S. Census. Every 10 years, they go through and they count folks. And depending on the population of your state, that determines how many representatives that you have. So the House of Senate, each state has 2 senators, so for a total of 100 senators. And the House of Representatives have 435, right? And then District of Columbia has 3 electoral votes. So depending on the size of the state, then you will have representatives assigned to you. So oftentimes around the election cycle, you'll hear certain states that are over and over mentioned. For example, like California. California has the most amount of representatives, so which translate into electoral votes. So that's about 53. So states like California, Georgia, Texas, Florida, PA makes up a large number of the votes that can come in, New York, Ohio. So a lot of times candidates will focus heavily on these states when they're trying to win an election. And so the presidential election happens every 4 years. But your House of Representatives, this election happens because they only carry a 2-year term every 2 years. So that's the importance of the midterm elections. So yes, the presidential election that happens every 4 years is important, but the midterm elections are just as important because that's where you get to decide who your representative is for your particular state and your district. And so the districts, which leads into what redistricting is. And so the winning party, the majority party, has the ability to go and designate the boundaries for what these districts are. So we're always looking to make sure your party is in a majority because then you have the ability to draw your districts, right? This is extremely critical because you may have the most popular votes, but still lose the election if you don't have the right amount of electoral votes. So extremely critical there. Now, one of the flaws that's been argued over time is gerrymandering. So that's when people manipulate the redistricting process and they take the electoral college to their advantage, right? So we have to be extremely careful with that and hold our representatives and hold our lawmen and women accountable for that so that we can prevent that as best as possible from happening. But everyone does acknowledge that there is some unfair practice happening there. So recently we just went through our 2020 census. So that means those results will come in probably March 2021. That's when they will reassign and decide the population for what our representatives will. So then the numbers will sometimes shift. So typically it's not drastic, but we do look for new districts out next year, spring next year. 2021.
Okay, and so we have a question. So we're going to take a moment and answer this question. Lawrence Gonzalez says, voting is fascinating in the U.S. since we push people to vote, but what are the platforms? Do we need to push people to read what the candidates are offering as well? Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We definitely need to, we encourage, matter of fact, that everyone not only go vote, but make sure you understand what platform the individuals you're voting for stand for, and make sure it represents what you want, right? And so we're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth too as we go through tonight's session, because I think in the last couple of days, as we alluded to, there's been so many talks around a lot of things and a lot of questions flying around, especially amongst the Black community, that it's imperative that we have these open and real conversations, quite frankly.
Right. And if you notice, mostly social media focus on the presidential election, right? Who's going to be our next president? But there's other items on the ballot, on the ticket, that is extremely relevant to you as a taxpayer, as an individual, as a U.S. citizen. So although you may not care so much for those, don't necessarily agree or disagree with that, with who the next president is going to be. But there's other issues, other amendments, other changes that affect your community that you should go out there and vote for. In addition to making sure you elect the senator that you want, a representative that you want, a local district, leaders that you want. I just want.
Yeah, and I would add to that, we shouldn't just push people to vote, but it's also each of our own responsibility, right, to vote and to be an informed electorate. So definitely, to Eunice's point, should be looking at all of the campaigns, all of the platforms. I always say from like school board and city council all the way up, right, because all of those have an effect on our lives. And some, I think the ones who are closer to you, city, state government, more of an effect than some of the federal government policies.
Absolutely.
Agree. Absolutely agree. Now, Eunice.
That as well. Just in terms of like a lot of the instances that have been happening in the news recently as it pertains to especially police brutality. We don't get the justice that we're seeking because, going back to your original point, Tanya, of the judicial system, we aren't appointing people or appointing candidates that are going to push the people that are going to look out for us and protect us in our interests, right? So that's another important reason to vote in the midterms and to be educated about all of the offices, your DA, anybody that's going to be put into a place where they can make decisions about you as an individual or your community.
Absolutely. And so for those that tuned in the very beginning, the video that we were showing, it really talked and reflected just that, right? You saw a lot of the hashtag say my name, say their name, individuals come across the screen. And it's for that very reason, right? Voting is what allows us to put the right people in place that can push the agendas that are our agendas in terms of our protection as a people. And so that is a very, very, very valid point, Ciandris, and thank you for bringing that up. So not to belabor the point, but, let's keep moving along. Eunice, you talked about the voting districts and, how the people we put in office kind of shape the districts. And we know that districting in terms of assigning those districts is a political move, right? Is very important, but it also has an impact on how people of color vote. So historically, what's been the ratio of people of color voting?
Right. So we're underrepresented when we go out to these voting booths. It's by far. Our white counterpartners are out there voting, right? So historically, we're just not coming out in the numbers that we should be coming out. And quite frankly, it's disappointing because we should be out there voicing our opinions and trying to move the needle in our areas and the things that we want done. So now, as of 2004, this is pretty interesting. As of 2004, Black voters in the ages of 18 to 24 have actually been coming out to the polls more. So there's been a spike there, right? But specifically, that's when you look at the data. This information can be found online at the census.gov, and then also at the election for. If you go to your state website, you can also find this data. But more importantly, more people show up for the presidential election than they do for the midterm election. So we're at about 57% are showing up for the presidential election, and about 45 are showing out for the midterm election. And of that number, still again, Black people are not coming out and voting. We could do better. We could definitely do better. We have a voice. We have something to say. So, for example, just in the state of Florida, for this election that's coming up in November, on the ballot is a question about should we increase minimum wage? So again, here's something that if you don't go out and vote because you're thinking, I don't care for any of the two parties that's out there, I'm not going to go vote. Here, you're not even casting a vote for a question as simple as that. And as Black people, this misconception or just not having the education of knowing to go out there, vote, we need to get more informed. We need to reach out. There's resources that's available. There's the local election offices where you can get more information. But historically, the numbers just aren't there. Very low numbers. Now, in 2008, when President Obama was in, there was a with Black voters coming out. Now, it's easy to say, Black president, everyone came out, wanted to support, wanted to represent, but it can't just be because there's someone who is a color in office, let's go out and vote. We should be hitting the pavement no matter what election cycle it is, no matter who is on the ticket, because again, the issue is out there. There's too much at stake to not be going.
Agreed. I couldn't have said that better.
I do just want to state, though, that we can't talk about the rate of Black folk voting without discussing voter suppression, right? Because that is a huge issue within our community and why many of our folks don't vote. There's been, I think Georgia has been kind of the poster child, and which is why Stacey Abrams has been waving her flag high.
Georgia and North Carolina. North Carolina has some ludicrous voter ID laws that are ridiculous, right? So, yeah.
Can you say with Black folks, right? You got to show your great grandpa's like social security number to vote, and it's not right. And I think that we have to also attack that problem if we want to see increased numbers to the polls. We can't have less polling locations in our neighborhoods that are more densely populated. We can't have stricter voting ID laws, especially because all of the research and analysis shows that there's nobody actually trying to, I shouldn't say no one, but it's very few people actually trying to swing the election by mailing in like fake voter ballots. So I think that's a huge issue that we have to resolve.
Yep. And I like that you made that point, Harold, because when folks say, well, what can I do, right? There's nothing I can do. Here are all the different issues that you just mentioned, 2 or 3, that people can get involved and try to help move the needle to make a change. So you don't have to wait for this big grandiose thing to happen for you to get involved. Something as simple as trying to go to your, the local courthouse, right? And your local community, and just getting involved and finding out what these issues are. Just goes a long way. So that's things that people can do right now today to help, so that by the time it's time for the election, you're not disenfranchised, right?
Definitely.
So we're talking a lot about the Black vote, right? And we know that there's been a lot of controversy circulating since, quite frankly, last year with this upcoming election around the importance of the Black vote in this election, and more so in the last couple of days, especially after the naming of Senator Kamala Harris as the Democratic VP candidate, which happens to be a historical pick as the first Black woman nominee. I've heard people say, oh, I cannot vote for Biden-Harris. And I cannot vote for Trump Pence. So do they vote for Kanye? We'll save that for another day. Let's not even go there right now. But folks are saying, I'm just not going to vote. And so let's talk about why that's just a really bad decision. C. Andrews, can you elaborate for us on why is the Black vote so important?
Absolutely. We are literally the difference maker in most elections, whether it's the primary elections or whether it's the presidential elections. So if you take, for instance, you can take Hillary Clinton versus Sanders, right? A lot of Democrats, or the Democratic Party, was primarily siding with Sanders during that election. But Hillary Clinton actually pulled in 80% of the Black vote during the primary, which kind of bumped her over Sanders. And same thing happened with Obama. He was literally an unheard of senator at that point, but Black people showed up for the primaries and pushed him over the edge. Same thing with Biden. If you look at this year's primary election, Biden was in 4th or 5th place going into South Carolina, and he was very reliant on South Carolina to push him over the edge as well. So those are a couple of examples where we are the difference maker in the primary. And then I think Eunice alluded to this earlier in 2008 with Obama's election. The reason why Obama was able to win is due to the Black vote, and due to us being actually motivated to come out and cast our votes on behalf of Obama. So I think our voting percentage went up about 5 or 6% during Obama's election. So that is, that's a pretty wide increase in us getting out the vote, and that literally made the difference between Obama, being in office versus somebody else. So the Black vote, we also tend to vote in blocks as well. So that's very powerful, right? A lot of candidates court the Black vote because we do vote in blocks. And
I would say 10. I said I wouldn't say 10 to vote in blocks.
can vote in blocks at times. Yeah, if we are motivated to do so. It's very important for Black people to get out and vote. As Eunice said, about 50% of us do. If more of us got out there and voted during both the general election and the midterm elections, we would probably see a country that was more reflective of the space that embraces us and our culture and our interests.
Yep, no, agree. So I'm gonna take us off script just for a second here, because we were having some interesting conversation prior to us going live, and I really want to touch on that because this is, we're about being real, right? As a YBC group, and I think it's very important when we're talking about the importance of the Black vote that we really focus on. And I'm gonna pose this question: are we our worst enemy? When I hear people say, I'm not going to vote, and we know what the struggle is for us to have even gained the right to vote. I mean, I think I said earlier to you guys, we've been in this country as a people for over 400 years, and we just got the right to vote back in 1965. So are we our own worst enemy and creating our own issues by doing simple actions such as saying, hey, I'm not going to vote? And audience, we invite you to chime in, put your comments in as we talk through this. But I know, Harold, you had some thoughts on this earlier, so I'll pose the question to you first.
I definitely think we can be our worst enemy. I don't think we have to be. I think sometimes we let perfection get in the way of being good enough, and also understanding that there's a process that we must go through, right? This is democracy. Nobody gets everything that they want. We all vote, and based off of the highest number of votes, that's what we do as a group. That's what we do as a nation. That's what we do as a country. And so I definitely think that we sometimes spend too much time looking for perfection and a perfect candidate that we sometimes miss the bottom threshold, that we just need someone who can keep the government on control so that we're not locked up in the house for 5 months. We need roads without, potholes. We need education that's funded. We need military that can protect us from Russia and China. Like, real basic. Yeah, we don't need, pie in the sky sometimes. And I think it's that practical thinking that we've sort of gotten away from.
Yeah, I agree. I think also we have to be a little more lenient in the understanding that people do change, right? I know a lot of times people are always, discussing like, oh, way back then, this person did this and they weren't for me then. And I think I think we have to, definitely keep them accountable, right? If they're running for office, but at the same time, when allowing people to, learn and change, right? And that's the point, right? Is to push people to change their minds and views on different policies and stances, so that when they do come into the office, they have your best interests, right? So I think we got to do a better job at that as a group.
And I think to add to that, Michon, the key thing that we should be looking for in any candidate is, first of all, somebody who listens, somebody who has compassion, somebody who's going to take in input and feedback from other people and act on that, whether that's, apologizing for an off-the-wall comment, whether that's changing a view or position on a policy. We're looking for somebody who's going to listen and solicit advice from the constituency that they represent. And I think that's probably the most important thing that we can look for. And without saying a whole lot, I think where I'm headed with this. So,
Well, I think you nailed it, right, Sienna. So listening, it's also about us listening to what the candidates' views and perspectives are. So going back to something that Lawrence was asking about earlier in terms of getting educated on the candidates' space and what their views are, their platform, absolutely. Because then by us listening to them, it gives us an opportunity to educate them, right? So then that's where you get people to turn around and turn their views and have a different perspective, because the reality is, as a culture, people don't understand our culture, right? Like, we understand our culture just like any other ethnic group understands their own culture, and everybody doesn't understand that culture from the outside. So you have to educate people on culturally what are the things that we need as a people in order to help shape that agenda, right? In their view. So I agree. We have to listen. It looks like we have somebody chiming in. Let's see. Laura said, people can change. However, in this day and age, no one apologizes for the things that they did in the past. I think that's the hang up that people have. Apologies are seen as a sign of weakness and a gotcha moment.
I have a strong opinion about this. I think if politicians apologize for everything they did in the past, that's all they would be doing all day, is issuing press releases. I'm so sorry I offended you in 1965. I'm so sorry I offended you in 1967. I'm sorry again I offended you in 1980. Like, I think we do have to allow people to grow and also recognize that it's a different time period, right? Yeah. For some of the older politicians, right? The ways in which we think about ideas and issues today is really different than 10 years ago, even more different than 20, 30, 40 years ago. So that's actually one of my biggest pet peeves, is when politicians do apologize, especially when they do it really quick. Like, they'll say something flippant in the morning, and then by afternoon news, it's like they've already issued an apology. I'm like, but they meant it. They said it.
No, I agree. Right. No, what is the apology without some substance of having actually learned something or been educated on something and some time have passed? Because I agree with you, Harold. There's no way I woke up this morning was like, oh, the sky's blue, and then in the afternoon, because it was great, oh, I'm sorry. No.
I think by the afternoon, I'm so sorry. I learned from my mistake.
Right.
I think we're seeing apology.
It's really Black Lives Matter, and it's like, all right, come on. Like, you learned that lesson that quickly, but I think it's a nice gesture. I think it's a PR move so that people can move on from talking about that issue. But
but that's where the accountability comes in, right? Like, we as a people have to hold those things accountable. So not to get too deep into this, but we were talking about how people's personal views on what the Democratic ballot looks like and the people that are representing that. And there's been a lot of, well, he didn't do this, or she did this, or she did that. And I think, to your point, Harold, it's about us holding people accountable. No candidate is a perfect candidate as far as I'm concerned, right? No matter whether they're Republican, Democratic, Independent, Progressive, whatever you want to label them as, no candidate is the perfect candidate. Quite frankly, Barack Obama was not the perfect candidate, right? But I think you have to look at who has the ability to be human, right? To be human in the sense of being educated and have enough empathy and understanding to say when, hey, yeah, you know what? I didn't get that before, but now I understand. Or I didn't understand that this is what the need was, but now, okay, I see it differently. But I think, again, to your point, that comes over time. That's not like I went to sleep last night and I felt one way when I closed my eyes, but now I woke up and now I've got this epiphany of I'm totally different. I don't think that's realistic. So,
Yeah,
and I think what we're looking for is action, right? So I'll take the apology, but there should be some sort of action with that apology, right? So yes, I said this statement, or yes, I did this, but how are you demonstrating to me that you really did want to correct the faux pas that you did, right? And that's what I'm looking for. And just not even in politics, right? Just in life in general.
In
That's
life,
what you're
right?
looking for. And I think most of the time people get the slap on the wrist when they release a statement and then they've moved on, and yet they're back to the same old thing. And that's why we have to hold them accountable. To say, hey, do you really mean what you said, or am I going to see change in your decision making?
Nope, agree. So I'm gonna get us back on track. I took us off for a minute. That wasn't part of the plan, but it's been a lot of talk going on. So earlier I brought up the electoral votes casted based on the people's popular vote by state briefly. Michon, can you further define for us what's the difference between electoral college and popular vote?
Yep. So the popular vote is exactly what it is, a popular vote. Whatever state or the majority of the people vote, whoever they vote for wins the popular vote. Popular vote typically wins are used for primary elections. However, when you are looking at the presidential election, we have this system called the electoral college. The electoral college is a system that kind of decides who wins the president. Every state has a number of electors, and it's usually representative of how many people they have in Congress. So we have a total of 538 electors that's all directly translates into the number of people we have in Congress. So you have example like Alaska having 3, right? Because there's 3 electors, and then you have California who has the most electors, who has 55. Most states have laws that require the electors to vote for whoever wins their primary vote within the state. There's a couple states that do not. And recently there was a Supreme ruling that requires all electors to follow the, if states have the electoral rule that they have to follow their popular vote, then they have to do it. A lot of time, only a couple states who don't have the kind of winner takes all, right? So there's when we're looking at the electoral college, when it's kind of like if you win one state, you take all the electors, or electors vote for all the for the president. Only a couple states who don't have it is Nebraska and Maine. So Nebraska and Maine both have the split votes, which allow the electors to choose either. To kind of divide, right? Either they can choose the president, one president, or a candidate and another president candidate. So typically what happen is they'll have one president that chooses, or one elector chooses the based off of the primary vote, and then the other choose based off of whatever they decide to choose, right? So for example, and I believe in a few years ago, Maine gave 3 votes to Barack Obama, and then two to Mitt Romney. Other situations that are kind of good to know about the electoral college system. A candidate needs at least 270 electorals to win. In rare cases where they do not have the 270, the House of Representatives will choose the president, and then the Senate will choose the vice president. That has only happened once in our entire history of voting, and that happened in 1824 with John Quincy Adams. The actual voting of the electoral college does not take place until December. So even though we typically know who the president is on election day or shortly after, we don't actually know the voting for the electoral college doesn't actually take place until December, mid-December. I think it's the second Wednesday after the first Monday in December, so right around mid-December timeframe. And then recently there's been a push for a lot of states to eliminate the electoral college, and there's a nonprofit foundation that's kind of pushing the idea that we should use the popular vote to elect our president. That has not obviously taken place yet, and that would actually require an amendment to the Constitution in order for that to take place. But there has been a recent push for that to happen. And there's been a growing number of states that have been looking into using the popular vote to decide the presidency. But yeah, that's all I have on the Electoral College.
To pick up on what Mashawn shared with you guys. So that's why typically in November, that magic number is 270. And so when you're sitting on your couch and everyone's watching, the TV screen, we're waiting to see which candidate reaches 270, because that's the majority of the 538 number that we're looking at. Just wanted to, piece of fact that, if you don't know about voting, that's what everyone's kind of just waiting for.
Exactly.
Who gets to,
Right.
Wins the race by then. And as she shared, officially they do the count, they double check it, and it's official in December.
Right. So
I'm
historically,
curious. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead, Harold.
I was just going to say, I'm just kind of curious how my fellow YBC members feel about the Electoral College. We have any abolish of the Electoral College folks on the line?
I'm curious too. I think we should get rid of it. I think it's an outdated system. Straight up, I think it's an outdated system.
There's always one or two. I was wondering.
The purpose of it, right? The purpose of it was to give representation based on the population. It started skewing with the whole redistricting and gerrymandering, right? That's when it just all blew out. Just went out the window.
Which in all honesty is why we as a people tend to think that our vote doesn't count, right?
Right. Yeah, a lot of times people don't vote because typically a state was always red or always blue, right? And regardless of whether they vote or not, their electoral college is going to be all in on one candidate versus kind of splitting their vote. So that's the reason why I myself agree that it should be eliminated, right? Because it doesn't really serve its purpose as much as it used to, and especially in this day and age.
I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, right? So you live in a deep red state is what we call it, but everybody's been talking about Texas turning purple, right?
Yeah,
which would make it a swing state because of the changing demographics. And Georgia as well, like another deeply red state, has been purple. Florida swings all the time, kind of goes back and forth. And then where I live now in Maryland is a flip-flop state. So like people typically vote blue, but we got a Republican governor, so you kind of go either way. I kind of go back and forth on the Electoral College just because I do think that it serves a purpose for sure. Especially, I've never lived in Iowa, but I would imagine if I lived there, I would want more than just a popular vote and the people in California and New York to decide presidents. But
that's true. That's fair.
But none of us live in Iowa, so.
I mean, when it works, right? But when it doesn't, then that's when we see the holes, and we have to come back to the table and say, well, let's revisit this, because now people are finding loopholes around this thing,
right?
And it's not favorable to the population, which is for the people.
Yeah, exactly. I think it needs to just be assessed, right? I don't know that I'll say completely done away with. I'm kind of on the fence about that, but I think because I do agree with Harold about the impact and the what it does to keep some fairness across the board, right, in terms of representation. But it obviously needs to be reassessed in terms of its approach and its use and how we're using it to cast votes, because it's not representative of all the people, right? I said earlier, democracy for the people, by the people. That's not really what we're getting with the Electoral College as it stands today. So just my 2 cents. But historically, so speaking of how votes get casted in red versus blue, historically, there's always been a focus on two primary government parties, Democrats and Republicans. Over the years, we've seen the stance of these two parties shift over time on the spectrum from liberalism to conservatism, flip-flopping back and forth, right? But about 60 years ago, the Independent Party was formed and has been progressing to the forefront more and more over the years. Sanders, can you tell us more about what does being an independent mean, and does this party affiliation limit what election an independent can participate in?
Absolutely. So the independent voting, not to be confused with the American Independent Party, which is a very far right leaning entity. An independent voter is somebody who is nonpartisan or who looks at issues as opposed to siding with one, either red or blue. typically they're represented on a ballot or on a voter registration as unaffiliated or as non-party preference. And that definitely impacts what elections you are able to vote in. So as an example, a state that has an open primary, regardless of whether you're Democrat, Republican, or unaffiliated, from a registration standpoint, you are able to participate in any of the primaries. Most states have some combination of a closed primary or semi-closed. So a closed primary would be an election where you can only vote within the primary election that you are a registered, whatever party you're affiliated with. A semi-closed primary is where, depending on the party and the rules of that state, you may be able to vote in a primary election. So as an example, in California, if you're unaffiliated or no party preference, you can vote for the Green Party, American Independent Party, or the Democratic primary, but you cannot vote in the Republican primary, as those rules are set by the RNC. So the main takeaway here is just to be very aware of your state rules, because depending on what state you live in, that may exclude you from being able to participate in certain primaries. In the general election, you are able to cast your vote for anyone that you please. So the main I guess caveat would be voting in the presidential primary election.
Right. So that's good information. And we know that the presidential election is the most famous of the elections, and it gets the most media attention, quite frankly, which I think is why when we talk about why people don't go out to the primaries and the midterm elections, because the media hype is around the presidential election, right? However, there are other elections that are just as important. That we talked about in the depiction of the branches of the government. Harold, can you elaborate for us on what's the difference between presidential election every 4 years and elections every 2 years, as well as the importance of the 2-year election?
Sure. So I think it's been mentioned a couple of times. Of course, the president is every 4 years. That's the one that everybody typically is glued to the TVs for. But in between those, every 2 years, there are what we call midterm elections, where we have House of Representatives. And then some state governments are a little sneaky, and they also have their statewide elections as well, basing on the fact that many of us will stay at home. So pretty much every November, every 2 years, there is some type of federal election that you definitely want to participate in. It's not uncommon for whomever wins on the presidential year to kind of win the Congress as well, because people vote kind of down ballot typically. But then in that midterm election, it almost always flips, because either people are upset at the current administration or the people who put the current administration in didn't vote. And so that was one thing that Michelle Obama talked about often was, Barack Obama could have done so much more had people vote in midterm elections. I have some opinions about that, but I'm going to leave that one alone. But it's really important to vote in midterm elections. And then make sure you're just watching your mail, because I know, like, in my hometown of Texas, the mayoral race for the city council doesn't happen during the federal election at all, right? So it's a whole nother election that the county gives for, like, the sheriff and the city council. And those are the people at the lowest level who are setting, your criminal justice policy, your SAG and PAN ordinances, and that kind of stuff. So
direct impact.
Yeah.
Right.
Direct impact. Yeah.
Agree. So yeah, that's what I was going to say. Those elections are the ones that are most important. But to reiterate a point Eunice made earlier, you don't want to forget about the 4-year election just because you don't have a strong opinion about a presidential candidate, because they do sneak in, as you said, Harold, other topics that really impact you directly at the local level, that are on those ballots that you need to let your voice be heard and put your opinion out there, right?
Right. And just to add to that, right? So let's say you may get the president you want in office. You don't go to that midterm election, then we don't have the House.
Right.
Right.
So then, which means it's a sitting duck. You can't push anything because now it's a stalemate, right? So you need to go out there and just kind of back on what happened in 2008. So about 65% came out and voted of the Black vote in 2008 for Obama. But then for midterms in 2010, we're hovering between 43-44%.
Right.
So come on. So not only is the presidential election important, but the midterm are just as important. And then, like Harold said, the other elections as well, mayor, school districts. I mean, all sorts of other things that are just as valid and as important. You as a tax.
Right. Yep. So before we wrap up, do my YBC members, y'all have anything else y'all want to share? Anybody in particular? Any additional information you want to cast upon the viewers?
Make sure your registration is current. They're kicking people off the rolls.
Make sure y'all pay attention to your vote mail-in ballot. Every state has different deadlines. There's been posts going around social media that kind of outlines, when you have to send your ballot in. So make sure everyone pays attention to that if that's a means that you're going to vote.
No, absolutely. So we hope we've shared some valuable information for our viewers and that each of you walk away knowing a little bit more about the importance of your vote. We will be sure to post the resource links that you can reference for additional information or guidance, as well as be sure to reach out again to your local election commission offices on further guidance about voting. We'll end by saying this: people, vote. Black people, go vote. Everyone, please vote, but vote wisely. The 2016 presidential election taught us that apathy is the pathway to disaster. After all, the voter apathy of the Black community was thanked by Trump during a speech when he said the African American community was great to us. If they had any doubt, they didn't vote, and that was almost as good. Voting isn't just a right, it's a privilege for Black people. Our right to vote was brought with the blood and resilience of our ancestors who throughout post-Civil War America fought for their right to be recognized as human beings and American citizens worthy of rights in the country that they helped build. So you're not just voting for a president this election, but you're voting to prevent a 7-2 dangerous conservative majority in the Supreme Court. You're voting for federal judges. You're voting for the rule of law. You're voting for housing rights. You're voting for former incarcerated persons to be treated with dignity and assisted to be proud and productive members of society when they return. You're voting so that everyone can have access to affordable health insurance. You're voting so that there will be Social Security and Medicare when you retire and in your children's future. You're voting to take measures to end racial asset and wealth disparity. So please join us next time, Thursday, August 27th at 7 p.m., as we will have Chief Operating Officer of SR Consulting Group, Tiffany Spencer, joining us to discuss Make Your 5 to 9 Your 9 to 5, Black Entrepreneurship. But before we go, one last thought. Change will not come if we wait for some other person or if we wait for some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change we seek. President Obama said this in 2008. So get out to vote because your vote not only counts, but it matters. Till next time, this has been YBC Revolt Talk.